we're trying something new here with our podcast, Navigating Sports Business, with some short form stuff where instead of a guest, just a coworker and I are going to talk about some emerging topics. And I hate to even call it a quick take or a hot take, but I guess that's the language and that's reality. So Charles Rolston is joining me today. He concentrates on our collegiate work mostly. He's done a lot of work with private equity and potential investment in college athletics. And we're going to talk about this potential deal with the Big Ten taking $2 billion of private investment and what that could mean. So no guest this week, just myself and Charles Rolston, waxing poetic here. And we'll even make some predictions, even though we certainly won't be right. It's something we work on a lot. So I'm hoping we can add some perspective to your day and this deal. Sound fair, Charles?
Sounds good, AJ.
Okay, cool. All right. How do you think we should start?
Well, I mean, let's start with the answer. This is the biggest cash injection we've seen potentially in college sports, and it's really going to reshape the landscape. And from what people have been saying online, it's really about selling tomorrow for cash today. So I want to start off with a hard-hitting question. If the Big Ten already has the richest media deal in college sports, why are they doing this now? Give me the case for why it's a good idea and why it's a bad idea.
My first reaction on why to do it is, well, we work on this together every day. There's a lot of upside in college athletics. We see the average growth rate of universities being about half that of high-performing leagues. And when you get down to an individual school basis, again, about half that. Our estimates at Navigate are somewhere in the range of 57 cents on the dollar is what we see universities getting out of the marketplace on a per loyal fan basis. And there's some nuances to how we define that, but you get the gist. And not only are we getting a fraction of what we could get in college athletics, but we're growing at half the rate. So there's investment opportunity everywhere. So the upside is if these universities take this money and they invest in positive ROI investments, they can leap forward. And the second thing I would say is great time of disruption, never waste a crisis. What an opportunity to basically invest your way into the future, given some significant costs these universities are facing. On the downside, I would say that's probably one of the motivators, right? They are scared. How are they going to meet this House versus NCAA settlement among all the other things that are going on? And that's where I'm concerned, is this a grab for cash because we need it today? Will we later regret it and say, well, we just issued a secondary equity offering when our stock was trading low, right? Because the ultimate question is, are you going to make better use of those dollars in your hands today for long-term investments, or are you better off in waiting? If this was a public company, you'd be buying back stock, believing that you're undervalued in the marketplace, and you'd prove it, right? And you'd use private, or you'd use debt or lower cost of capital. You'd borrow essentially from your university, and in general. So yeah, I don't know, push back, Charles. What do you think?
No, I mean, that's the big question. When people saw this massive number, it's going to add about 9 figures to each university's balance sheets over the next, the term of the deal. I mean, that's the question. Is this truly about fueling long-term growth? And do we think that the institutions and the Big Ten as a conference are forward-thinking and progressive enough to come up with creative revenue generation ideas? Or is it simply just a reactionary short-term balance sheet coverage play? And if that's the case, I mean, we both know that pay for play and athlete compensation is not going away in 10 years. It's only going to be growing bigger and bigger until it's at the levels that we see within the professional sports realm within the United States. So really, what is the long-term play here? And I think we've talked a little bit about some of these external pressures and cost efforts that are going to be putting pressures on balance sheets on institutions across the country. But really, I want you to go a little bit deeper into what those pressures are that are forcing the Big Ten to finally seek outside capital instead of their usual low-cost financing channels that they've gone through institutional support or government bonds that have been cheap forms of capital in the past.
Yeah, boy. See, that really gets to the crux of, and by the way, this just isn't the Big Ten. A very large percent of our clients and college athletics overall at the university level are considering external funding sources, private equity, debt, et cetera, for their athletic department. And I know of 3 other conferences that are pretty far down the road in these considerations. One of those I don't think is going to move forward, but I appreciate you framing it that way, because this isn't just the Big Ten. I mean, this is what we're looking at, right? The professionalization of college athletics. And in the real business world, people use debt very successfully to amplify returns, right? Of course, they also are very responsible investors, where you would never take money if you didn't think you could drive an ROI that was 3, 4, 5% above the cost of capital, right? Above that borrowing rate. And that's where I'll go back to that stat I shared earlier. If major universities are growing each year, year over year, at about 6%, if you borrow money that has a cost of capital of 10, 11, or 12%, let's say, how are you going to suddenly double your performance? And it's not overall performance. It could be specific areas in which you invest. You don't have to unroll this money overnight. If you're wise, you would pace it out. But yeah, my fear is they use it to backfill problems, and it'll be a future generation's problem to deal with how that money was spent. If you were someone in college athletics, or you're just a fan and you're listening to us and you're wanting to know, is this a good idea or a bad idea? What would be most, I guess, impactful for you, or what would be most helpful to know from the work that we do?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to know, where's this money actually going? What do they need it for? And if it's not just going to pay for players, and the assumption is that this revenue share cap was going to be hit regardless of this private capital money coming in, where is it going to go? Do you think it just goes straight into facilities? Does it go into training and nutrition and recruitment? How does the Big Ten take this extra cash infusion that they're getting and provide them with an edge over their SEC peers or Autonomy 4 peers when you have this revenue cap in place and NIL dollars are scrutinized and coming from outside investment vehicles instead of from within the university? So where do you think this money is really going if it's not just smoothing over the balance sheet?
Oh, uh, what's so scary is something's wrong with me. I'm a skeptic, and maybe it's from all these years of working with universities. They have so many stakeholders they have to serve, right? Students, staff, faculty, alumni. There's bureaucracy. That's just the reality. The incentive structure for these executives is not that of like a private company. So it really does scare me on how they'll deploy it. It is typical. Here's what I'd predict would have happened in the past, and we should probably start our future projections on what happens in the past. They would put on a Band-Aid, right? They'd solve a short-term problem. They would pay athletes with it to try to win now, but that's a very short-term investment, right? And I personally would predict that the current House versus NCAA structure and limitations with the clearinghouse on NIL deals won't hold up. It's pretty hard to tell an employee they have a cap on what they can earn, right? Or total payroll for an organization, but there's no floor. You can voluntarily pay less. Which one of us listening to this would agree to a comp structure at your place of work, which there's a ceiling which you can earn, but no floor? Your employer can voluntarily lower your pay. Who's harmed by donors giving kids money, in this pay for play concept? So I don't see the long-term NIL sort of clearinghouse restrictions holding up, and I see compensation increasing. We know there's an already planned sort of annual adjustment up for the House settlement money. We know, as we open this conversation with, that college athletics tends to leave a lot of money on the table. So are there places they could invest this and create something of great value that grows in time? There's also some pretty interesting governance stuff that could come with this, right? And oversight. I mentioned quickly the incentive structure. For there to be a healthy collective incentive structure to drive revenue, there's no doubt that unwired network sales, like bundling some things, could potentially benefit some schools but cost others, right? Do you want to bundle your jersey patch? I'm guessing if you're Northwestern or Purdue, that's pretty nice if someone rings you that deal. If you're Ohio State or Michigan, is this going to be us subsidizing, the conference again? I'm really worried, but I'm also optimistic about what could be done. At Navigate, and I know I'm running on long here, so I'm sorry, Charles, but at Navigate, we have a plan for this, right? This is how we advise our clients, and there are some super high ROI things. CRM and sort of, database management, sort of ticket sales and customer service, increasing fundraising and ticket sales staffing and professionalization, compensation structures. Everywhere you look, there's opportunities to significantly leap forward. So if these universities take that money and they invest in something that will perpetually make them more money, yeah, the opportunity's there. I just wonder, do these schools have that playbook? Like from what you've been there with me, Charles, and so many of these battles that we've had, what percent of the time, as an example, would you guess that a university that comes into a windfall of money puts it into a positive ROI investment, considering the cost of capital, versus hey, I'm not going to be the AD or president here in 5 years. So, yeah, what percent of the time would you say windfall of money is invested wisely?
I don't know if I want to give an exact number, but I'd say that less than half the time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right. Yeah, boy, we're going to make a lot of friends with these comments, aren't we? But that's the reality. To make it to look backwards, how many times did we do something fancy with a locker room or expand a stadium that didn't need to be bigger, that didn't have a positive ROI because we wanted to keep up with the Joneses? I mean, that was a lot of college investing, over the last 20 years. The facilities arms race. Yeah, I'm nervous slash skeptical that we're going to use the money wisely.
Let me ask you a follow-up. In terms of new assets, what can a fan expect to see in the future? I mean, you referenced jersey patches, which aren't there today, but you seem to be very confident that they're going to be here tomorrow. What about more international games, more commercials during the broadcast, higher ticket sales for championship games? End zone logo signage? Like, how
Yeah.
far are we going to go once this door is cracked open a little bit with private capital expecting a high rate of return? What level of commercialization and monetization do you think that fans are going to see?
Yeah, I would say everything you just said and then some. In fact, I would look around the world at best practices or things you've seen in international leagues or the pro sports leagues in the US and say they have to come to college athletics. Revenue is not a dirty word when we're serving the overall mission. So just because we're a not for profit doesn't mean that there isn't a benefit to optimizing that revenue. It can end up serving the mission of the university. We see every day the unbelievable things and transformations for our clients that can take place when they're successful in athletics. We all know there's a demographic cliff coming, right, on enrollment, and there's a general sentiment and trend toward less people going to college and feeling they need a 4-year degree, especially young men. So these are businesses, these universities are businesses, right, that have some very serious headwinds, and not all are going to thrive or even survive. I'm not talking about Big Ten universities, but some of these smaller regional universities. They're not all going to make it. So yeah, I would say anything that's not nailed down is eventually going to be sold, because that's what happens in the pro sports world, because your neighbor is going to do it and your competition is going to do it. So to add to what you just said, picture some of the digital applications of what can be possible. And college athletics is pretty far behind on digital stuff. In the pro sports world, if you have a critical mass of people coming to your venues, you build a mixed use real estate development around that. It is a highly profitable investment to take advantage of the critical mass of people that are coming there. It's really good for the fan experience. It helps with egress and regress and tailgating, all that stuff, but it's profitable. You could build dorms, condos, restaurants, bars all around in what are now usually just parking lots or just fields at a lot of these universities. So the real estate play is tremendous. Commercialization, ticket prices are probably too low. Stadiums are probably too big. There's probably too few, not probably, there's almost certainly too few premium areas and experiences. Yeah, look around the world, see that stuff. Oh, mid-season competition, made for TV events, right? These multiple team events. Look at think of the work that we've done with the leagues, Charles, right? On why wouldn't you have a mid-season tournament? Why wouldn't you have all-star games? Why wouldn't you break up? Why wouldn't you turn recruiting into a spectacle? Why not have your spring games be something that are meaningful? All of these things are revenue opportunities. I'll give some credit to Brett Yormark at the Big 12. He's thrown out a lot of ideas. Some of them have been held back or delayed, but pretty much everything Brett Yormark has said about these innovative revenue generating ideas, courtside seats at the championship game, playing games in Mexico, turning their draft sessions into sort of a combine type event. These are all winners. I can remember when we did the research for the NFL on the draft and trying to make it a primetime thing and make it an event. It was one of those no duh moments where it was like the feedback was like, it was more not can this be a major event? It was what is taking you so long? So yeah, all of that is there on the table and more. I don't want to bore everyone listening with all the things that could happen, but yeah, I guess that's why I'm stuck and I keep conflicting myself here in this conversation, because everywhere I look, I see opportunities. The question is, will they use the money that way?
Yeah. And I think we kind of touched on it for the general fan, what's important to them. But realistically, if I'm a Big Ten alum, and I'm not, but if I am, I want to know, okay, what side of this deal am I on? Do I want this to happen for my individual institution within the conference, or do I want to hold out for some reason? And I think we're seeing some of this play out, with the way that the headlines came out yesterday. There does seem to be positive support for the commissioner on the idea of accepting private capital, but specifically Ohio State and Michigan were said to be fence sitting. And I want to take you back to 2021 when CBC invested around 2 billion euros into La Liga. Real Madrid, Barcelona, Atletico Madrid, the biggest brands in La Liga really pushed back because they were arguing that this was going to mortgage their league's future. So with Ohio State and Michigan, the two biggest brands in the Big Ten, being hesitant here, do you think there's enough leverage for them to slow or stop this deal? Or do you think that ultimately they're just trying to negotiate the best terms out of unequal revenue distribution possible, and ultimately that this is going to go through?
Ooh, I suspect it won't go through because of those two schools you just mentioned. Ohio State's probably worth about 4 times what they get from Big Ten distribution as far as their a la carte value. Now, you need people to play. You know, you're never going to get your a la carte value unless you're the Globetrotters, right, or something like that, the Savannah Bananas. But if you're Ohio State or Michigan and you really understand your value, like I've heard, you know, some of these rumors that have leaked sort of say it's going to be proportionate to your current budget. You know, at the end of the day, being distributed flat as the TV dollars are, or conference distribution is a massive subsidy to the conference, to the, you know, Northwesterns of the world from the Ohio States of the world. So yeah, I'd be very concerned about that, what that means, and if I'm getting more proportionate value, and especially because this is possibly perpetual. You know, we don't know if they earn their way out of it or can buy their way out of it, and if it looks like debt or if it's equity. But to make a permanent decision today for that, yeah, we at Navigate are predicting, as you know, and many of our friends know, that there eventually will be performance-based compensation and distribution from conferences across all these leagues. Because how do you hold the Big Ten together with the kind of disparity I just described? And do all those universities actually make sense as peers, you know, earning equal revenue? Not realistically. You know, you want to create an incentive to invest and to succeed on the field and what have you. At the same time, if you love the Big Ten and you like the way the structure is today, and you want to play defense against a super league, and you want to ensure the Big Ten is the Big Ten 20 years from now, yeah. So you could see some conservative-minded people kind of liking the, I'd rather have, you know, 90% of a sure thing in 20 years than 100% of an unknown thing. What if Ohio State were to try to join a super league? What if, you know, they demanded their exact proportionate value in the next TV deal? That would be a much tougher situation on schools in the bottom tier than this deal.
Well, I'm going to play devil's advocate and I'm going to give the opposite prediction. I think that this
Yeah.
ultimately does go through. I think that Ohio State and Michigan are ultimately fence sitting so that they can optimize the terms possible. And they know that there's enough support for this to go through. And if they try to fight it, it will be a political nightmare and a headache. So ultimately, I think it does go through. But assuming that it doesn't, and assuming that you're right, AJ, where does private capital and private equity go from here? Do they go back to talking to individual schools? Do they go back to this super league concept? Do they give up on college athletics altogether? Where do you think they go?
Yeah, everyone's waiting for some. It's like the penguins, you know, at the edge of a glacier, you know, just about to nudge each other off, waiting for someone to dive into the water and see if it's safe. There are so many universities and conferences that are ready to do a deal. There are many others considering it. Everyone in college athletics wants to be seen as a smart early adopter. No one wants to be first. You know, best first only is pretty rare in college athletics. So someone's going to open these floodgates. There's a part of me that kind of hopes you're right, Charles, just to open the floodgates, and because of some of the positives that I noted earlier, that, you know, certainly status quo is not getting us there. If you look back, all these rule changes, everything that college athletics is in right now, all the potential and all the problems are our own doing, right? We let the law come along and lawsuits come along and dictate what we have to do, as opposed to getting ourselves there. You know, the invisible hand of the market, right? And free market motivation didn't get us there. So maybe a little nudge here, whether it's right or wrong. But boy, my worries go beyond this. You know, realignment. You know, Navigate is predicting a wave of realignment coming in a few years here. And, you know, you got to think about real options, right? Like, is this what the Big Ten is going to look like forever? It's not what the Big Ten looked like a year ago. And that Big Ten wasn't what it looked like a year before that, with 2 waves of realignment. So, you know, making permanent decisions or long-term decisions, you know, is the Big Ten done? Is the Big Ten supposed to have 4 schools on an outpost out here in the West traveling all that distance? Populations moving west and south. The Big Ten has the opportunity, in theory, to grow in the South, which is a very big deal for Fox. Let's not forget about Fox in this conversation. It's not just, you know, the Big Ten conference office that would want to play defense against a super conference. Fox has a wonderful relationship and equity in the Big Ten network. There's doors that close and doors that open, right? By making such a 20-year decision. By the way, 20-year decisions in college athletics do not age well. So you
Yeah, I
got to
mean,
rein
this is truly one of the most fascinating developments in college sports finance. I mean, done right, it could really cement the Big Ten stability and competitiveness 20 years into the future, which is a
yeah.
long time in college athletics. Done wrong, and it can really be a cautionary tale in selling too much of your future for short-term gain. I mean, there's really never a dull moment in college athletics, especially in the past
Yeah.
couple of years. But I'm going to let you close. Is there anything that wasn't touched upon that you think is super important that all of our listeners should be aware of before we finally close here?
Well, I actually I have 10 things I'd like to say, but I think we probably bored our audience plenty. But I'd like to continue the conversation. You know, people can reach us through the LinkedIn website for Navigate, or for me personally, again, this is AJ Maestas. You know, my email is monitored, which is aj@nvgt.com. So yeah, maybe our next, you know what we should do is we should honestly invite Tony Petitti to come on our podcast. He's the only major conference commissioner who hasn't, and get some of the reality out of this and give them a fair chance, you know what I mean, to weigh in on this. But if you have something, a question, we're pretty serious about answering the big ones or trying to address them with a future guest. So give us your feedback. Let us know if it was helpful or not. The intent of having conversations like this with Charles and I and other coworkers at Navigate is to give you a little bit of an inside look, inside baseball, and some of the stuff that goes on in these boardrooms. And I think you'd be really surprised about what happens in these boardrooms. It's remember, these entities are being run by university presidents. Think about what it takes to become a president, the career path, what your motivation is. You can't think like a typical sports fan in this moment, right? I mean, like, hey, you know, this is what the Cowboys would do. It's a very different world. It'll give you a little bit of sympathy for what they go through and the challenges they face. And yeah, we want to hear from you. So let's keep the conversation going. And thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you for listening. And Tony Petitti, open invite for you to come on the next podcast. We're really looking forward for you joining.
I might regret that one. Yeah. No. It'd be a fascinating conversation. Thank you. Appreciate all being here.
All right. Thanks, AJ.